本期视频是新加坡副总理、财政部长黄循财2023年10月参加美国战略与国际研究中心论坛时的谈话节选。黄循财相信中国经济仍会继续增长，中国人的动力和能量不应被低估，新加坡可以有不止一个最好的朋友，并强调新加坡的未来只能由新加坡人决定。黄循财将于2024年5月15日接替李显龙，成为新加坡第4任总理。我们看看他是怎么说的吧。
If I may start with a question that's perhaps suited to your hat as finance minister.
Sure.
And that is your views of the regional and global economy. Slowly, I think it's fair to say, emerging from COVID, but many countries experiencing low growth, high inflation. I think we've seen a slowdown, perhaps to some extent unexpected, in China in recent months. I wonder, how do you see the regional economy, Singapore's economy, and in particular also sort of the future of China's economic growth?
The broader context is that we are moving from an era of benign globalization to a new period of great power competition. So it's going to be a more fragmented world, a more uncertain world, and there will be more tail risk, more volatility, more, unfortunately, events of turbulence that can create huge uncertainties in the global economy. So amidst that broad environment, I think we are also facing another change from the last 10 years of easy money, very low interest rates, to another, perhaps a more normalized period where interest rates will be higher for longer, and the era of easy money is over. So I think that's a broader context that all countries everywhere are facing. And in that environment, I think we will see more sluggish growth. We are experiencing it because Singapore is very attuned to this because we are such a small open economy, and external demand makes up so much of our GDP growth. We are the canary in the mine, if you will. When the external environment is bad, we feel it most instantly. So we feel the effects of sluggish growth already. Hopefully, inflationary trends will come down. We are hopeful. We see some moderation, like in the US, but we are worried about downside risk with regards to oil. What's happening in the Middle East can have an impact. With regards to food supplies, with El Nino and other unknown risk, things can also take a turn for the worse. On China, I think they are going through a challenging sort of situation now because there's high youth unemployment. They have decided to prick the real estate bubble, and there will be painful consequences from doing so. I think it's the right thing to do because there were excesses building up in the real estate sector, but real estate is about 20 to 30% of their economy. It's a big part of the economy, and once you prick the bubble, there are all sorts of consequences, knock-on effects cascading throughout the entire economy, which they will have to manage. At the same time, they will have to rebalance the economy towards one that's more consumption-based. It's not easy because they will also have to undertake reforms on the social security front, which will take time. It's quite complex given the size of their country. But talking to their officials, I think they understand what needs to be done. And it's a matter of communicating and also making sure that the implementation is done well. So overall, our sense is, you hear a lot of commentators and people talking about peak China. We think that's overstated. We think China will continue to grow. What's perhaps in question, and what many people are asking, is to what extent, yes, China's economy will grow, maybe 4%, maybe 5%, but to what extent will it have that same entrepreneurial vitality and dynamism that it had before? I don't think anyone has the answer now. I think the Chinese government itself will have to figure out what's the right balance, and everyone is watching for clear indications of sustained market reforms before they decide that this is indeed the right trajectory going forward. But I would say I would not underestimate the natural animal spirit of the Chinese person. They are highly resourceful. They are determined to secure a better life for themselves. And you should never underestimate that tremendous sense of drive and energy in the Chinese people.
How is Singapore's government navigating the U.S. and China economic and political rivalry, this dynamic? How do you see it? How are you navigating it?
Well, on U.S.-China, I would say, first of all, both sides have made very clear that they do not want a confrontation. And hopefully there will be a view that this is not a zero-sum contest. It's not one side wins, the other side loses. The world is big enough to accommodate both US and China, and the two can coexist and develop together. So it's very good that talks and engagements have resumed in recent months. And hopefully through these dialogues and engagements, there can be an effort to reduce misperceptions, misunderstanding, and enable more mutual accommodation and meeting of minds. And what we would like to see and what we hope to see is that the presidents on both sides, President Xi and President Biden, hopefully will have a chance to meet and talk face-to-face in APEC, and they will be able to help rebuild the strategic trust that's so important to take the relationship forward in a positive way. The positive way means there will still be competition in some areas, but there will also be areas where there is engagement, constructive engagement, because there is so much that both countries can benefit mutually by working together, both bilaterally and also in tackling issues of global concern like climate change. And so we hope this will happen. It's a relationship that will have some elements of competition, but also many elements of constructive engagement. If this does not happen, and if the relationship turns sour, then it will be a big problem for the two countries, but it's also a huge problem for the rest of the world. Everyone will be worse off. From Singapore's point of view, when we look at this relationship between US and China, our perspective is that this is not about balancing between America and China. Ultimately, we make decisions based on our own interests, and our national interests will very much be guided by principles of international law. As a small country, we need that rule of law framework to operate. And so that's how we will make our decisions, which means that depending on the circumstances, in some instances, we may make decisions that seems to favor one side versus the other, but that doesn't mean that we are pro-China or pro-America. It simply means that we are pro-Singapore.
Fair enough, yeah. As you should be.
Indeed so, right, as every country will.
Exactly. So let me take it a step further, if I may, to get your thoughts on this. It's such an important topic, and I think Singapore's perspective is very important for us to hear. The Biden administration's Indo-Pacific strategy says, and this is a quote, "The PRC is combining its economic, diplomatic, military, and technological might as it pursues a sphere of influence in the Indo-Pacific and seeks to become the world's most influential power. The PRC's coercion and aggression spans the globe, and it is most acute in the Indo-Pacific." Is this the right framing? How do you see this framing from the standpoint of Singapore?
The Chinese talk about 3 phases in their nation-building journey. They want to stand up, they want to get rich, and they want to get strong. And I think they are, in their minds, in the get strong phase of their nation-building journey, which means they feel that their time has come. They need to take their rightful place in the world, and they ought to be more assertive with regards to their interests abroad. But I think China also knows that it has to play its cards carefully. And they have to grow their influence. China has to grow its influence without making other countries feel pressured, coerced, or squeezed. Because if they do so, if they end up doing so, I think there will be a backlash against China, and that will not be in their national interest. So China will have to learn how to moderate and adjust. But from Singapore's perspective, and certainly from the perspective of all the countries in Southeast Asia, we value the friendship we have with the US. America has been a very good friend for a very long time. China now is also a good friend with all the countries in Southeast Asia, and we would like to stay friends with both. After all, it should be possible to have more than one best friend.
Well said. Permit me one more question on China, and then I'll invite the audience to begin to ask questions. I'd suggest we have mics on both sides of the room. Please, if you'd like to ask a question, maybe make your way to the mics and line up. But in the meantime, Mr. Minister, and I recognize this is a sensitive question, but I feel sort of obligated to ask it. And it relates to the question of PRC influence in Singapore, and in Southeast Asia more broadly, but Singapore in particular. In July, you may know, the Washington Post published a long article exploring this topic, focusing in particular on the role of Chinese language media in Singapore, which the Post asserts in the article, and this is a quote, that this media now routinely echoes some of Beijing's most strident falsehoods. How should we understand PRC influence in Singapore, and what is Singapore doing to combat disinformation?
The newspaper in question, this was highlighted in the Washington Post, the newspaper in question has strongly rejected the portrayal by the Washington Post. It has defended its editorial stance. And if you were to ask Singaporeans, the vast majority of Singaporeans reading the Chinese newspaper daily will not feel that what was portrayed in the Washington Post was accurate, because we can read and see for ourselves articles on China, and they cover a wide range, including many articles that criticize China's approach. Ultimately, Singapore's newspapers have to reflect Singapore's perspectives. They have to reflect our society. Our newspapers cannot resemble the Washington Post. Neither do we ask the Washington Post to become like Singapore newspapers. But we, on PRC influence, or the influence of any other country for that matter, we are mindful that we are a small, open, and diverse society. We are a multiracial, multicultural society. The majority of our population are ethnic Chinese. So we have ancestral roots going back to China. But we have, over time, evolved our own Singaporean identity. We are Singaporean Chinese. And the Singaporean Chinese is very different from the Chinese from China in values, in outlook, in identity. Just as a Singaporean Malay would be very different from a Malay from Malaysia or Indonesia, or a Singaporean Indian would be very different from someone that comes from India. And America, being a nation of immigrants, you must understand this very well. But given that we are such a small, open, multicultural society, we know that we are susceptible to influences from elsewhere. And that's why we are very vigilant about this. From the government's point of view, we continually engage our public, educate, explain what is our national interest. Why do we take certain decisions? Not because of choosing sides or because of external influence, but really because of Singapore's own interest. And we spend a lot of time doing that. In fact, if you look at the large proportion of what Singaporeans consume in news and entertainment, actually, a lot of it is in English, and a lot of it comes from the US and UK. And, to be candid, there's no shortage of criticism about Singapore in the Western media, no shortage of commentaries and articles highlighting the shortcomings in our system and asking us to be more like Western liberal ideals. So we are very aware that as a small country, we are susceptible to influences from all sides. But at the end of the day, what's important for us, small though we may be, it is, we are our own people, we make our own choices, and it really comes down to Singaporeans deciding on the future of our own country. Not China, nor the West.
Thank you, Mr. Minister.